Hey everyone, welcome to the Healthcare Provider Happy Hour. I'm your host, Jennifer George, and I'm joining you this afternoon with a special guest. His name is Farouk Bello, and he's a physiotherapist in the UK, as well as a health activist and the creator of Rooks Health. We're going to chat all things health, communication, growth and development in healthcare. So grab your drink of choice and join us. Welcome to the Healthcare Provider Happy Hour. This is a safe space where we invite healthcare providers to unapologetically be themselves after the working day. My name is Jennifer George, and each week I will connect you with guests and stories that will help transform your stress to success and fulfillment. Are you with me? Grab your drink of choice and let's chat. Hi, Farouk.
Hey Jennifer,
How's it going?
that's going good. It's going good so far. Busy day, but as always,
Yeah.
can't complain.
Thanks for joining me. It's 1 p.m. my time, and I know it's 6 p.m. UK time.
Yeah, yes
Yeah,
it is. Yes, it is. Figuring out the times was something I always had to do. I was having to look at Google, like, what time is it there where she is, just to make sure.
me too. I always Google it. So you just came home from work. You were just
Yeah,
at
not long
work
ago.
today.
Yeah, I work. This week is a Saturday Sunday working, so for 10 days straight working.
Yeah.
Luckily, I like my job, so it doesn't seem it's not as overbearing as it would be if if you didn't like your job, to be honest.
Yeah, especially if you're working that stretch, right? So tell us a little more about yourself, Farouk, before we get more into your work.
As you know, my name is Farouk Bello. I am a physiotherapist by nature. I just qualified no longer ago. I qualified about 4 months ago, 4 months ago, 4 or 5 months ago. And I'm originally from Nigeria. I was raised in Nigeria, Lagos. I was born and bred there. And I came over to England for university and this pre-university like foundation. And been here about 5 years now. So now just carrying on to work here. Come
Nice.
from a family of medical. My dad's a doctor. My sister is a doctor. She also just qualified, and my mom runs the hospital. So yeah, it's a family of doctors and medical people. Hence the physiotherapist.
Right. It just kind of was a part of your destiny.
It was. It was. My destiny was medicine to be a doctor, but I had other plans.
Yeah. So, well, what brought you into physio then? What opened your mind up to that?
The reason I actually came into physio was initially I was going on the path of being a doctor. Because my dad was a doctor. I grew up
Right.
around the hospital. Not in the hospital, but around the hospital, if you get what I mean.
Yep.
Just being around and going, following to work a lot of the time. And I was always interested in the medical field. But the question then became, because I like sports also, I like basketball. I wanted to try and play basketball. I wanted to see how far basketball could take me. But then, with medicine, medicine's a full-time thing. You can't be doing other things. It's like one or nothing. And we had a physio at the hospital. My dad works, and she got me interested. She was like, "Oh, they do sports and physio," and I was like, "Ooh, really? This is a profession?" And then she introduced me to all the things physio could do, and I thought to myself, physio seems like a good happy ground where I could, if I can't play basketball, I can at least be around athletes. I can at least help out in. It's a second medium, but then I really started to get into physio, and I just really enjoyed it. Once I saw the options and the possibilities of everything you could do with physiotherapy, and it was kind of almost limitless for me. And I was like, you could be almost in any area or expertise, and there'll still be a physiotherapist there. And I just kind of fell in love with it. And sports is still on my mind. And once I realized that I don't really have any chance of going to the NBA, I was like, what? Let me stick to this. What I'm good at as a physiotherapist, and that's how I kind of came into being a physio.
That's awesome. And maintaining that connection with sport, I think, is so cool. It's so interesting because I find a lot of physios that I know, they their aspiration initially was to go into med school. And some go back around and go into med school. But then I think we don't know enough about physio and how vast it is and how such of a cool profession it is and dynamic it is until you're in it. Like until you're in the schooling and you see all the opportunities that are there. So good for you. Well, I'm glad you're part of our profession.
Glad I answered. Glad I answered.
One of the things I saw on your profile, Farouk, was through Rooks Health, your podcast and your movement here. One of the things you do is debunk misinformation. Can you tell us a little more about that? I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I started Rooks Health in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. So while we were in lockdown here, I started losing my head a bit. And I'm a person who always keeps active. When I was in university, you would see me. I could have classes in the morning from 9 a.m., but I'll be playing basketball from 7 to 9. I always kept myself active. So being in lockdown and with not having too many things to do, I had a dissertation to do, but I still wanted to do more. So I decided to start the podcast. And the reason I focused on, debunking health myths, and I didn't want to make it too heavy physiotherapy specific, meaning I would only talk to physiotherapists and I would only talk about physiotherapy. And because I recognize that, the good amount of population, a lot of people, there's a lot of myths and misinformation that still spreads because as internet builds up and the world of media builds up, it's very easy to spread things that are just wrong or not enough evidence behind it, or things that are just flat out harmful to people. So in my head, I thought to myself, what, it took a bit of what's it called, how do you go about this, or are you qualified enough, or do you feel like you're the right person to talk about this? But once I got past that, because naturally you probably realize it after we talk for a while, is I can talk on almost a lot of different topics, even though it's not specifically health, physio, because I have that interest in, I have interest in nutrition, I have an interest in psychology, these type of things just about the human body and physiology genuinely interest me. So it was a no-brainer for me. And I just said, let me pick on, trying to fight some of the things that are, commonly spread that easily because I grew up in Nigeria. So particularly there, it's quite bad sometimes. For example, have an ankle sprain, maybe that's freshly playing basketball or football, and you sprain your ankle. I remember, I'll never forget when I was growing up playing basketball. A friend of mine, he sprained his ankle. The next thing, people were like, "Oh, get some heat and rub it and press it and hold it." And I was like,
Oh,
uh, that would have been normal, because that's what some people think, and that's the
right.
type of thing that is carried on. It's like almost traditional type health myths that just carried on. And I thought, what, even if I could just try a little bit to fight some of these things, educate at least my family, at least my friends,
Mm-hmm.
it was a good start. And then I just really got into podcasting and got into really audio editing, video editing, and it just really, now I'm doing it as much as I can, and I enjoy it most of the time. Podcasting, I get to meet loads of people that are interesting, hence why I'm here, like yourself. I also found it's a good network tool to just meet people around the world. You're in Canada, I'm in England,
Yeah.
but then we made a connection right there already, and that's how I've met other people through my podcast.
Right. That's amazing. I got to say, like, at this stage in your practice, it's like all of it's coming together for you, and now you're just building. And I love how your interest is not so physio specific, and you're just all about global health in a way, and just helping people where you can, right? And it doesn't have to be
Yeah,
just in the confines of a room, under the payment of an employer or whatever it is, right? Like you can do that beyond that,
exactly.
right? So I appreciate you for doing that. That's amazing. So like
Yeah.
during this expansion, I guess you can say, of yourself and of your practice, and I say the word practice loosely because I think it's a practice of many things, not just physio. Have you, even through your schooling up until this point, have you had to overcome a lot of stress, profound stress to get here?
Um, yeah, so I've stress has come in multiple ways. I'll give one example first. One was while I was in uni, I had a placement that was just hard. It was ridiculously hard, and it was stressful. Going in there every day was a challenge for me because I always thought it was multiple things. It was a bit of the team. I wasn't really gelling with the team. I felt like I was being picked on. I didn't really have a good experience overall that whole placement. But at the end of the day, I realized that I had to take something out of this placement. I had to still get it done. And that's one of the quotes I love. Tell no one wants to hear excuses. You have to just figure out a way and get it done.
Mhm.
And during that period, it was very tough, and I had to just figure out. It was a very stressful period, and I had my coping mechanisms. One of my biggest ones is it's pretty similar to what a lot of people use is exercise. I play basketball. As I said, when I'm playing basketball and when I'm gymming, everything else, forget about everything else because I can just focus on one thing. And when I finish, it really helps me relax naturally. And that's one way I was able to do it. And even now, as I just started, I'm in community rehab slash community therapy. So coming out of uni as a first placement, almost everyone could acknowledge this is a very hard thing because you're independent working, you're alone working. You really only get, I rarely see other people unless, you have to see with a patient or I call if I need a bit of advice. But most of the time you're working alone and you have to make decisions by yourself. So it can get, it was initially through those first few weeks, I was like, oh, this is actually a bit stressful, because I'm fresh out, you're doubting yourself, you're questioning whatever you're doing. And it was just fighting through that and then realizing, getting more natural and saying, you know what, maybe I trust myself, because I have gotten this far. That's what I always tell myself. I've gotten this far means I must know something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. There are loads of systems that would not allow me to get this far if I didn't know what I was doing. So it's almost
Yeah.
trusting.
Building that belief in yourself.
Exactly. Exactly. Building the ability to say, I'm a physiotherapist and I'm qualified. So what I know in my head must mean something. And putting it in practice was a whole different thing. But then as it goes along, sometimes you start building that confidence because coming from a student, you always have an educator, you always have someone who is there. You really never feel like, you can mess up. And especially as in a healthcare profession like us, where we have the direct impact on people's lives. I always say, my mom always used to tell me that after God, the next people were doctors, and because of the fact that we saved lives. My mom always said that. I think she was being hyperbolic, but I do understand what she meant. And I always think, if you're in healthcare, I can change someone's quality of life. So I had to start believing in myself a lot more because people were relying on me, and that's how I kind of put it in my head. But naturally, it started to sometimes building that confidence naturally comes. Sometimes you have to realize and reflect, and then it comes out of you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because the purpose of all of it really is your own growth through it, right? And that is how you evolve as a practitioner and as a human being. And I'm so glad you said that because one of the things I try to do as a preceptor, whether I'm working with a senior level student or a junior level student, meaning like first or last placement before they practice, is I try to give them as much independence as possible. Um, I try not to focus so much on the book stuff and focus more on just their own reflection, their own sense of being and practice and building up their own way of practicing, right? Because it's really easy as a preceptor to put your own biases on your student, right? But it's a whole other thing to watch your student come into their own. And I think that's one of the things that I love about educating and precepting the students.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's
I'm
great to
sure
see
you
you on this
found that.
path.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
sure you found that what's it called in healthcare and the different school of thoughts, and people think differently. And the only way you can really develop yourself is if you come to these conclusions by yourself, not being imposed in there. Because then you start having conflict in your mind and you start thinking, maybe I don't really agree so much with this style. And you agree with this, and then but someone else is forcing it. But it's naturally, as you said, growth by your own independence.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, we can get so hooked on like fulfilling other people's expectations or trying to fit in depending on the workplace, depending on, whether you're a student and you need to pass this placement, right? Like so easy to conform. And then when you do that, it just becomes harder, I think, to find yourself. So if you can meet one person along the way, whether it's a preceptor, a colleague, your mom, right? Like whoever it is along the way that can inspire that in you, I think that you're very blessed and lucky. So that's awesome. One of the things is that I really like too is like your quest for growth, obviously, like we just talked about. Now, when it comes to interpersonal communication with patients, because I think this is the fact that you're growing all the time in the background of your patient care interactions is huge. And I think that's what makes a good interaction to a great interaction, basically. Like that's the leap right there. Can you tell me kind of how through your practice right now, you've realized the importance of bringing yourself to your patient care interactions?
Yeah. So I really like that question because one thing I think has shaped me personally and the way, and it's very important to know that everyone, the way people communicate is always different, and it always depends on your background, where you've come from, how you've developed yourself personally. And I always take back to my African heritage and my roots in Nigeria because I was raised in Lagos, Nigeria, and talking to people the way I would talk in Nigeria is not the same way I would talk to people in England.
Right.
I was raised in a hospital. I was raised around the hospital the same way I used to talk to patients and my dad's patients or my the physio's patient when I used to shadow. It's not the same way I would talk to people here, just because of the different circumstances. But using those experiences, I was able to, as I come here, the way I speak to people here and the communication skills, I realize is, as we've said before, it's one of the most important things as a practitioner or as a person in general. So we don't even always have to be in healthcare. Just the way people talk to each other is remarkably important because you may be saying something. I know this is always it's not even a hot take or anything. It's a normal thing that's always people always say. The way you talk to someone, the way you think you're saying, and the way they're getting it may be two different things. And the question then you need to ask yourself is, who is the problem? You can look at the way, you can look at it that way and say, who is the problem? Where's the issue coming from? Where you can look at it and say, how do you solve that? Or how do you improve and tailor your communication skills? And as you said, interpersonal communication skills with different people you're talking to. Because if you use the same mannerism or the same, either non-verbal communication or even verbal communication, talking to the same different people using one type, you're not going to get very far because you're going to have issues either with, you're going to say something in one way and the other person is going to think, oh, I didn't really like the way you said that. And it's always one thing, as we come back to it, being in health, it's if you put yourself in that person's shoe or you put your family member in that person's shoe, how would you want them to be talked to? How would you want them to, have be communicated with? Because one thing I was like working in the community, I've strongly realized is that some people, especially in COVID now, they haven't seen a doctor. They haven't been able to see a doctor in months because of change of circumstances. So it's only telephone consultation. So me just being there and talking to them, it's almost like, please, I need your help so much because I haven't had health professionals see me and talk to me in so much while. So they're pouring out their problems to you, and you need to be there to be able to assure them. And that's one thing I always find, even if there's nothing else, even if sometimes, because you have to recognize there's nothing you can do sometimes. You have to know when your own practice ends and what to do next. But the way you communicate is at that level of talking, and you say to them, it's like, this person has really come and helped me. I don't know if I'm waffling, but it's a very interesting thing, and the communication skills is for me is a very important thing. I think it probably will trump, because you can be the best practitioner, you can know exactly what you're doing, you can know everything, but if you can't talk to them in a way that they're gonna receive it in a nice way or in an effective way, you're almost wasting your time. And that's, I think, one of the skills people have to build on first before you start worrying about other things. Because, as I said, you're dealing with people. We're not dealing with computers. You're not dealing with algorithms. You're not dealing with maths. You're dealing with actual human beings who think predictably and unpredictably at the same time. So how do you tailor that to
Right.
each person?
There's so much there that you said. And some of it did bleep out a little bit because of the connection, but the gist of what I've got there was that empathy, what you're saying, like seeing that person as potentially a loved one or yourself one day needing care in their shoes in a way. That is really like, once you make that connection of empathy, which is the ability to try to understand where someone's coming from and the emotion behind what they're experiencing, then and only then can you actually be compassionate, right? We can't put really like compassion before empathy. You got to have that gateway into it first. And when you talk compassionate care now, which is what you're saying there, now we're talking that holistic aspect, right? Now we're seeing the patient as a whole being, and we can be clear-minded enough in that moment to offer that to them and whatever they need. And like you said, it can be unpredictable, right? You don't know which way it's going to go. And we have to be adaptable. That's I think one of the biggest things as healthcare providers, like you said, if we go into every interaction like almost like we would with a technical skill competency, which is doing the same thing, right? Like icing an inflamed joint, let's say, like, you know what I mean? If you go into that
Yeah,
with your communication, you might find that
you mean
things,
something.
yeah, it just doesn't go, it might not go your way just
Yeah,
because it might be what you think you know. And I
it
think
does.
that's why it's so important to bring the humanistic aspect to healthcare and
Yeah.
bring it back, maybe.
You said two things that I like to I pride myself on and try and develop. It's holistic and adaptable, meaning don't just look at this person as what their ailment is or what their issue is. You need to look as a circle of biopsychosocial model, but we won't get into that. But that's
Right.
what I always try and do, it's holistic. That's why I like holistic health. And the second is adaptable. Situations change, people change, how are you going to be able to adapt to that and figure it out and get it done in the best way while still looking at holistically at the person?
Right. And I think even that, like you were talking, that telemedicine type consultation and communication is also super important right now to get that across through the medium of technology, like, you know, that compassion, that empathy, and getting that across. If anything, it probably will improve that skill, and that intention as time goes on. Really cool, Farouk. Like I know we can talk about this all day. But tell me, like, what is your advice then? Because, you know, not a lot of practitioners at this stage, I got to say, and I commend you again, just they don't have that gray thinking, you know, that lifelong quest for growth. A lot of people at this stage in their practice, where you're at, are very black and white and worried about what they know and what they don't know, and they don't trust their deeper intuition and instincts and their human connection with another person. So what is your advice now for healthcare professionals that maybe have just graduated, like yourself, going into practice now? What is your advice so that they can get through that doubt that they might have sometimes?
Yeah. For people who are just coming out of practice, especially, for myself, doubt is completely normal. It's completely fine. It's okay to, occasionally be worried. And that's how I think the moment we stop questioning ourselves is the moment you probably stop learning. Because if you stop questioning everything you do, even have that little bubble that says, what if?
Mm-hmm.
What about this? The moment you lose that, I think it's not a very good trait to lose in the sense, because as when you're coming out, you're going to be worried about, can you put all the theory you've learned in university, can you put all the practice while you've had shadowing, being on placements, can you now do that by yourself? Because the reality is, sometimes people think that, depending on where you work when you come out of university, sometimes you may have a very fully supported, you may be on a ward inpatient, and you may not be doing things, but sometimes you might be like myself, where you have the lone working. So it's back to it, is adapting to whatever situation you're thrown at. And it's completely normal I think now I've come to realize it's completely normal during that initial phase of transitioning from, being theory to fully now qualified, meaning people are looking at you as no longer a student physiotherapist or a student nurse. They're looking at you as just a physiotherapist. Like, you have that level of responsibility, and it's okay to feel overwhelmed occasionally, but it's how you then, you know, get out from under it and don't let it burden you, because the moment it starts to burden you, it keep pulling you down. You're not going to allow yourself to grow. And sometimes I think we worry too much. Do I know everything? Can I treat everything? I don't think that's the way to go about it. It's obviously, I want to develop my clinical skills. I try and do CPD as much as I can, learning from Twitter, learning from Instagram, learning from the books, but it's not being too bogged down, because you're going to have to realize occasionally you don't know everything. I
Right.
can imagine even yourself, as no matter how long you practice, you cannot know everything about
Yeah.
everything. A doctor cannot answer every single question about every single illness in the world, unless that person is something else. But that's no one, as I said, no one is perfection. And
Right.
once you acclimatize yourself to it and say, you know what, it's okay, I don't know this. How am I going to learn it? Or how am I going to develop? That's when you really start growing. And it's not, as you said, it's not always about black or white. It's not always, can you do this or can you not do this? It's always that middle portion of how you're going to connect those two together, how you're going to then develop your personal growth, both, as you said, clinical skills and interpersonal skills, communication, and letting the patients know that you are there to help and you're going to do it the best you can because you more than you can. It sounds almost like a sounds like a ridiculous statement. You can never do more than you can, but yeah.
Well, then you know right now, I guess, right? But and not to be so hard on yourself, right? Uh, One of the things that I found have been really pivotal for me when I made that switch. I mean, I didn't make it as early as you have, but when I made that switch was when I started letting my patients guide me more. When I humbled myself enough to learn more from my patients, because as much knowledge as I have, you still have to learn about the story and the person in front of you to see if that knowledge, like you said, matches this situation or could be adapted to
Yeah.
the patient's needs at that time and their goals. Incredible, Farouk. So, what is your unique gift? I can name a few based off what you're telling me, but what do you feel is your unique gift right now to your patients, your practice? Tell us.
um well, not to sound what's it called, boasty or anything, but one thing I like to value myself is, and I keep trying to let this in my practice is, letting the patient talk, let the person talk. And it's not only just, I don't just let people talk. Like I saw someone today and I didn't just let her talk just about her pain. She had the sciatic pain. She talked around her background. And I think understanding someone's background, ethnicity, where they come from, how they perceive different things is very important. I think that's one thing I like to keep as my unique selling point, because that allows that holistic approach. Because if you don't know about someone's what's their psychological state, obviously we're not getting into the deep psychological, but just a basic understanding of their psyche, as well as what's that little social background, how are they living, what's it called, what's their family situation like, you can really start to understand a few things about, maybe even most of the time it's actually relating to the problem they're facing at the time. Because I always say this, and this is one thing I always in my practice now, whenever I see a patient, I see a lot of people who have falls a
Mhm.
good amount of time, a lot of elderly patients who have falls and maybe they've come out. So I need to assess. And I'll give a quick example. I had someone who was repeatedly falling and she had developed back pain from this fall. And in my head, standard physiotherapy approach would be, go treat that back pain first, address the back pain immediately. And but then I thought to myself, I have to address the back pain 100%. But why are we having the falls? What's happening around that? Because you can keep treating the symptom, but you haven't actually addressed I don't know the right word to use, but the reason behind it.
Right,
Because no matter what you do with the back issue now, the person's going to have another fall again. Are you going to be back to square one? Are you literally at this point putting out fires? Just keep on putting out fires. Why not just stop the fire as a whole from
right.
ever happening in the first place? And that's one thing. Obviously, that's one example. That's the mindset I always go with every patient and every scenario. Is there a reason behind what's happening to them now? And can I stop that reason? Is it within my power? If it's not within my power, you have to know whose power is it within. That's another big one.
Yeah.
Where do you stop? Where do you take over?
Yeah, that's amazing. So not only do you get to the root, like I should say the greater goal maybe of the patient to not
Mm-hmm.
fall again, right? Like that's ultimately the goal, but the referral might have been for back pain from a fall, right? Like it's so interesting how that plays out, and it's up to us to kind of really understand what all that really means with our patients' guidance, right, and help. And yeah, I don't know. I just think that's super incredible. I could talk more and more about this, but I'm going to let you go shortly. So, where can people learn more about you and connect with you and listen to your podcast?
So I have my Rooks Health podcast, which you can listen to on pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and well, anywhere, Stitcher. And also, you can also follow me on @Rooks Health on Instagram and Twitter. So I always update that there. And I try and do, little tidbits from my podcast episodes, just something you can listen to and grab. So it'd be well worth to give that a follow and, keep up whenever I drop a new podcast. I try and drop not as much as you, which I am very impressed. But I'm gonna start doing a lot more. As I was listening to one of your podcasts as I was driving to work this morning. Now
Oh,
I was like,
nice.
I like this style of it. Just talking and having that informal chat with your audience, and that's what I'm gonna start doing a lot more of. So make sure
Yeah,
to check that out.
Yeah, I feel like people would really like to hear from you a little bit more. I can say that.
Thanks a lot, Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks a lot for you for joining us and yeah, just sharing your spirit with us and your purpose for practicing. I appreciate it.
No worries. Anytime, Jennifer, anytime.
Okay, take care. So if you guys like this podcast, please subscribe and leave an honest review. Your feedback means everything to me. Your reviews are what moves this podcast forward, and I always appreciate receiving them. If you want to get a hold of me directly, reach out to me on social media. My handles are in the show notes, and you can always subscribe to my weekly newsletters at jennifergeorge.co so that we can stay connected. So until next time, thank you guys so much again for your ongoing support.